Really excited to be joined now by Mike Rothstein, the Falcons beat reporter for ESPN, the host of From the Perch. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
All right, so big news out of Flowery Branch this week, or official this week. But Desmond Ridder will be the starting quarterback heading into Sunday. Looks like for the rest of the season. We'll touch on the Marcus Mariota bit of it in a second, but just... is this a move that you felt the Falcons had to make, given, under 20 points offensively, 4 of the last 5 games are in their 4 losses? Or is this a move that they were ready to make and Desmond Ridder was ready to get this starting job?
I think it's both. I do. Definitely the had to make, because it was very clear this team was going nowhere fast with Marcus Mariota. Mm-hmm. The defense has been improved by their metric. Let me rephrase that. By their metric, the defense has been improved because they still go up a ton of yards. They're still not good on third down. Mm-hmm. But what Dean Pease measures it as is points. He's always said that. He's been consistent there. And points-wise, they've been pretty good the last 5 weeks. The one game they won is the one game they gave up over 20 points. Like, they've been good there, at least when it's mattered. Like that Carolina game, was kind of added on at the end, right? Mm-hmm. They've been good defensively in terms of scoring defense.
Yep.
But the offense just hasn't moved the ball. And Mariota got progressively worse each week in terms of missing throws and wildly missing throws. Some of them, when Pitts was in, I think it was more explainable that Pitts was clearly dealing with an injury all year long, or majority of the year. Mm-hmm. And one injury or another, and it was, there was some issues there, so that could have affected stuff. But other guys, it's just like, what are you doing? And I think it got to the point where Mariota wasn't giving them enough. And I wrote about this on Tuesday as well. I spent months, talking with Desmond Ridder at different points about his development, and it's why a lot of times, and I kind of was not saying everything I knew when I knew it throughout the season, you've seen me on Twitter, trying to breadcrumb stuff a little bit of, well, no, listen, he's just not, it's not just Mariota. Like Ridder has to be ready. And Arthur Smith admitted it on Monday that a month ago they would have had to truncate the playbook somewhat to play Ridder. They don't believe they're going to have to do that. And part of why that is because Desmond Ridder now understands the mental part of it, understands the nuance of it way better than he did 2 months ago, which one would expect. Yeah. However, Desmond Ridder told me, it was in the middle of October we talked about this, that really at the beginning of October, he realized it wasn't like he was still missing on the small stuff, which the small stuff as an NFL quarterback is the difference between success and not.
It's the details, yeah.
Yeah, so he realized that, and then he decided to kind of revamp his approach. Everything Marcus Mariota was giving him was good, but he decided to revamp his approach. He started using Quizlet, which I didn't know what Quizlet was.
Oh, really? I used it in college.
Yeah, see, Quizlet was not around when I was in college.
Yeah. Will, so many Latin flashcards in college.
Yeah, I used I would go and buy the flashcards that you would buy, like the index cards, and create them.
Yeah,
like that was what I did.
I've got a shoebox filled with many of them, but Quizlet was a lifesaver in that regard. Saving trees, so Quizlet.
So I remember asking him, hey, what is Quizlet? I'm an idiot here. I don't know. And he's like, oh, it's like flashcards. Well, he's like, if you played high school or college ball and you know what it is. And I'm like, well, dude, I'm old. A, I didn't. B, I'm older than you. And then he actually also got his wife to help him out. So what he would do is 25 minutes to a half hour every night, he'd have his wife say a play call and he'd recite it back. So kind of like mimicking the headset. Now, it was funny. He told me there were the times where his wife, Claire, would struggle with some of the wording and the verbiage. And he kind of had to help her a little bit there. But that was good practice, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was all of a sudden. Then I started talking to other players, and they were like, yeah, night and day difference. Caleb Huntley told me completely different guy than rookie minicamp in terms of some of the stuff that they've seen from him. Frank Darby was basically telling me, oh, yeah, no, by the end, he was starting to finished the play calls before Charles London got them out in these post-practice sessions, they would last anywhere from 15 minutes to a half hour with guys like Huntley, Darby, Felipe Franks, so Josh Ali, some of the practice squad guys as well that they were getting because they're mostly running scout team. So all of these things started to come together for Desmond Ridder as he started to gain more comfort with the offense. Does this mean he's going to be successful? Well, we have no idea.
Right.
Like, let's be honest. There's no idea. But he's put in a better position to succeed now than he would have been a month and a half ago in terms of what he knows and how he can approach it.
I think, coming out of rookie minicamp, heading into training camp, kind of around training camp, what we heard about Desmond Ridder was that from a mental standpoint, like he was picking it up quickly, that he was ahead of the curve. So it makes sense then if he understood, hey, the area of my game that I can gain the biggest advantage on while I'm not out here starting and not getting time on Sunday is the mental aspect. But you also likened his development to a slow drip in your story. And I really like that, a coffee just slow drip.
Not me.
Right. Okay. So that's kind of how they've gone about the analogy that they're using, yes, right, for his development. Do you think that they had this bye week circled as the time when that coffee would be ready the whole time, or do you think that this just kind of all came together because of how Marcus Mariota played early on in the season, bought them more time, and that now, given how everything's occurred, it's just the right time?
I think it's a little bit of everything. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I truly believe it. I think, yes, ideally they looked at it and they said, hey, if Desmond Ridder is ready and Marcus Mariota is not playing well, then yes, they'll make the switch. Now is the perfect time. Mm-hmm. Do I think they could have made it before? If Ridder was ready, yeah, I think they would have potentially considered it beforehand. I also think if they were in a different division, they might have considered it beforehand where there wasn't the possibility of playoffs. And there still is very much the possibility of playoffs. But at some point, and Arthur Smith's alluded to it, at some point you have to say, well, okay, am I going to chase this? And let's be honest, at this point, you're chasing it with Marcus Mariota. It's probably not going to land you in the successful place you want it to be, considering they lost 4 or 5. Like, right. I think if they had won 3 of the last 5, then we're probably not talking about Desmond Ridder again.
No.
That's part of it. Like, their hope was always that Marcus Mariota would have a career resurrection and be the guy going forward. They would not have signed him if they didn't at least have some hope that would be the case. Mm-hmm. And there were points this season where you could say that it looked possible.
Yeah.
With what they were trying to do. I mean, that game against San Francisco, people pointed at the yardage, but he was doing exactly what they asked him to do. Now, was that going to be enough? No. I mean, he hasn't thrown for over 200 yards in a game since October.
Yeah.
So it was very clear that when they went to an attack that had to have a little bit more passing, that was a very big problem, and it didn't work. But when they were trying to build it more around the run game, it worked very well, and mm-hmm. you were able to get by. Now, would that have gotten him the job next year? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll never know because it didn't work when they asked him to do a little bit more, and they tried to evolve it a little bit more.
Yeah,
yeah.
Offenses do have to evolve, right? Like that was the big thing is the Falcons had a great head start with the work they were able to do on the ground game early, but defenses take some time to kind of really, I think, find their chemistry, even though they usually have a head start on offenses in training camp. It's usually around like the halfway point of the season where the really good defenses or the developing defenses, I think, really start to show improvement. I think 2016 for the Falcons is a good example of that. Yeah. And the Falcons and offenses in the league try to stay ahead of that curve. They say, all right, you're adjusting to what we've shown you through the first 6 weeks. Now we're going to come in here with the counterattack, with the curveball, the off-speed pitch, and throw you something different that you haven't prepared for, and maybe win 3 out of our next 4 because we're showing a new look. I think the Falcons tried to do that, and they ran into the limitations of the quarterback position. So
100%.
It seems as though Marcus was told Thursday morning, the reports get out. Friday, he comes to the team, says he's stepping away to get a knee injury, a chronic knee injury looked at, right, and evaluated. So did that surprise the Falcons in your estimation? Did they anticipate, A, this injury being something that Marcus was dealing with, and B, that he would ultimately kind of leave the team and potentially land on IR as things stand now because of this.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there was some surprise there. I mean, because here's the thing. Arthur Smith in particular, and I think we've seen this over the last 2 years, has been very conservative and cautious when it comes to injuries. There are a couple maybe exceptions here and there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they've generally been really cautious because they're very big on not wanting to turn short-term things into long-term things. And they've also been pretty transparent. I mean, you have to be with the injury report because otherwise you get fined. But they've been pretty transparent on the injury report throughout the season. Marcus Mariota has not been on the injury report once this season.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry. I'm not sure. He may have a knee thing. We'll find out as things go. But I'm not totally buying that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just not. Because if Marcus Mariota was still the starting quarterback, do I think he would be all of a sudden having his knee looked at? No, I don't think that. I mean, the timing is awfully convenient. Because here's the thing. If there was a really big issue with the knee that you'd want it looked at, you want to know when you might have had it looked at? Now, granted, he had a kid, but
right.
You might have said, "Hey, I'm in a hospital."
Yeah, while I'm here. Hey, can we just get this checked out?
Sometimes appointments can take what they take, but I'm just saying, I've been around the league long enough.
Yep.
It does not seem like it doesn't necessarily seem like it seems like if A then B type scenario versus like this was because I've seen this on social media and it's driven me nuts. Will, they did not bench Marcus Mariota because of a knee injury.
Right.
This was done. I mean, Arthur Smith said it was performance-based, but I can tell you with certainty, 100% certainty, this was not because Marcus Mariota had a knee injury. This is not because Arthur Smith had his hand forced.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is another thing I've seen. Like, no, they made this decision. They knew they needed to make this decision, and they did it. As far as Marcus Mariota, I mean, yeah, I've been on a lot of coach press conferences. I thought Arthur Smith was very transparent and very clear and like almost screaming it from the rooftops. Like, A has nothing to do with B.
Mm-hmm.
Mariota basically is like, I'm not starting anymore. Peace out. Like that's kind of how I read it, how I read the entire situation.
And that seems to be, the most straightforward answer. I'm learning, I think, with this coaching staff, with this kind of regime, usually maybe is the right one. Like there doesn't seem to be a lot of, we're trying to play games with you guys. Like usually you don't also hear a coach go out of his way to say this was performance-based multiple times in a press conference. But I think that they needed to make that clear distinction that, yes, an injury is involved with the player who's no longer the starter, or supposedly there's an injury involved with the player no longer the starter, but that had no factor and no bearing on why the decision was made. Usually, like, coaches don't come out and explicitly say that, like, unless asked the third time that was right. that was the case. So I think that that's very telling. But let's go back to Desmond Ridder real quick, because I want to talk about, what to expect over the next 4 games. And the media gets very, very, very little glimpse into practices during the actual week, right? It's 15 minutes and usually, or maybe 30 minutes if people are generous, but generally it's 15 minutes and it's stretching, right? And it's maybe special teams, individual work, or has that changed?
The Falcons give a little bit more.
Okay.
In terms of what we see.
So then have you seen anything from Desmond Ridder from the start of the season to now? What growth have you seen, if any?
That's been really hard.
Okay.
To say. And that was why when I wrote the story I wrote on Tuesday, I don't know when this is running, today, Tuesday, whenever you're publishing this.
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, so when I wrote the story on Tuesday, I knew that most people had not seen him. And we, on Fridays, we'll go and talk to Arthur Smith on the field. So I've seen a little bit of the post-practice stuff, which is kind of how I knew some of what was going on there. Not that I was like paying a lot of attention to it, but you would see him work. And that was generally going on every day from what I've been told by multiple people. But no, there's no way for us to gauge because of what we see. I mean, right. I generally see a couple quarterback throwing periods almost on most practice days, and that's about it in terms of that. Like most of the whatever team stuff is done that we see is not revelatory or anything like that. And, Desmond Ridder's been with the scout team every one of those practices until probably Wednesday. So, well, definitely Wednesday. It's tough to say. Now, I have watched Ridder throw a lot during warmups and pregame, and I have watched Ridder throw when he's just kind of throwing to Drake London and what was Drake London and Brian Edwards and what was at one point Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I mean, there is some velocity on that thing. How that looks in a game, we have no clue. Anyone who tells you they know how Desmond Ridder is going to play is lying to you, because there's no way to know, or they're from the future. And if they could just pass along some Mega Millions of Powerball numbers to me, that would be wonderful. I'd really appreciate it. You're just not going to have a good grasp on what that's going to look like, because the only time we've seen Desmond Ridder play, Will, is in the preseason against backups. It's not even like they gave him really run against any teams once. I've been trying to think whether they did. I think maybe some ones were in against Jacksonville, but not many, if that.
Because you get later on in the preseason, then both teams kind of decide, hey, we're not going to play any of our ones. So he got like longer and longer run in each game, but not necessarily against starters.
Right. I mean, and we saw a little bit of him getting run in practices. But that was because they mixed and matched everybody, because they knew that Desmond Ridder was one snap away, and that was what it was going to be. But he never, or very rarely ever, got any work behind the number one offensive line, even during training camp. Now, there is some help there because Drew Dahlman and Matt Hennessy were in a training camp long battle, and the way they alternated it. So there is some familiarity between Drew Dahlman and Desmond Ridder, but other than that, this is a giant mystery, both in how Ridder will play, and also I think the type of plays that they run. I think we could see a little bit more variance in what they do based off of Ridder's skills versus Mariota's skills.
I completely agree with that. I think there's a chance we see less of the zone read that I think Marcus that was maybe his best play, was that kind of 3rd and 6 zone read, pull it when the defense is expecting and pick up a first down. We may start seeing more calls that are geared towards what Desmond Ridder does well. And maybe that is getting the ball out quickly for a screen or something like that, if he's not as equipped to do the zone read thing as well as Marcus was. So this is the last one for Desmond Ridder, but you talk about how nobody really knows going in. So what do you think is the right way for fans to fairly evaluate the quarterback position over these 4 games? Because you and I both know that people are going to freak out.
They're not going to fairly evaluate it.
I know, so that's why I'm asking you, how should they? If we can only create the world that we wish to live in, then how should we ask fans to evaluate fairly the quarterback position?
Treat it like an elongated audition, and that as long as nothing goes horrifically bad, like we're talking like Ty Detmer throwing 6 picks, I think he was with the Eagles then or whatever, bad in a game.
Jake Delhomme versus the Cardinals in the playoffs. Yeah.
As long as it's not that, I think that you go into next season with him at least competing for the job. If it goes really well, then you might have your quarterback issue solved. If it doesn't go well, you're probably losing at least 3 of the next 4. And you're probably drafting in the top 10, which might be able to get you a quarterback if you like one of the quarterbacks that are coming out, whether it's CJ Stroud or Will Levis or TBD. That's where it is. I mean, I would say this. No matter what, unless Ridder goes out and goes starts completing 75% of his passes for like 280, 2 touchdowns, and doesn't throw, throws like 2 interceptions over 4 games. Unless something like that happens, or he decides to become Brock Purdy,
rookie year Justin Herbert, yeah,
I mean, like, no, but in all seriousness, unless that happens, I think that it's an open question going into 2023. It's one of the bigger, it is one of the bigger, but not the biggest, no matter what happens, not the biggest question, I think, around the Falcons this offseason.
So what do you think that is? Pass rush?
100%. That defensive line and edge rusher. That was the biggest issue going into the season.
I agree.
That is the biggest issue coming out of the season. Without question. I think it's number one, and I don't even think quarterback is important because of the nature of the position and what it's doing offensively. But I don't even think when you look at totality of this team, I think the defensive line and edge rusher are way more important than quarterback in terms of needing to find that.
For sure.
Because as we saw with Marcus Mariota, as we saw even with Matt Ryan last year, and maybe we'll see with Desmond Ridder, Arthur Smith's a good enough play caller and a smart enough play caller that he can make it work with what he has. And one would think that their skill position guys and maybe their offensive line will be better in 2023 than 2022 because some guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London will have another year of experience. Mm-hmm. So will Tyler Algier and potentially Caleb Huntley. And also, you have money to spend in free agency if there are guys that you want to go after, and you do have another draft. But defensively, they need help badly in that defensive line and edge rusher category besides Grady Jarrett and I would argue Arnold Ebiketie. Like I think we're going to see a lot of Arnold Ebiketie and
D'Angelo Malone
and D'Angelo Malone down the stretch.
Yeah, so let's stick right on that. So you in your podcast, which came up this week, talking about some of the other changes that we could expect outside of the quarterback. Arnold Ebiketie, D'Angelo Malone, you mentioned that in speaking to Coach Mancino that Lorenzo Carter is playing way more than they want him to, and that we could see down the stretch Ebiketie, D'Angelo Malone getting a little bit more run there. That it would benefit the Falcons to kind of make that those moves to get those evaluations in there. Why don't you feel like Arnold Ebiketie is already carved out a little bit of a bigger role? Because to me, he's been one of the kind of standout surprises, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, because you don't want to give him too much too soon, because also I think you can argue he's been really good as a pass rusher, but you don't know how he's doing. Like setting the edge on the run has been a little bit meh.
It's been bad.
And when you're playing opposite Lorenzo Carter, whose job is largely to rush the passer, well, you need that guy to be the edge setter on the run. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is part of it. And Ted Martino explained a lot of this, where like their roles, Malone and Ebiketie and AK, there we go. AK,
so much easier.
AK's roles are different. It's almost like they play the same position, but they play two different positions. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. So it's tricky, but I do think we'll see more. I went back and looked at kind of Lorenzo Carter and when Lorenzo Carter's been at his most effective throughout his career. And it's usually when he's playing like between 60 and 70% of the snaps. Mm-hmm. Like when he went on his 5-sack and 4-game stretch to end last season, that's where he was playing, in that range. And I think that the Falcons would like to get it more in that range.
Yeah.
But they just haven't been able to because of the youth of AK and Malone. And let's be honest, Ogundeji
is been disappointing.
No, I wouldn't even say it's disappointing. It's just showing he is way more of a run stopper, and that's your guy. And he's not going to give you a ton when it comes to pass rush.
But I think even in that area, because I agree, like I was really
he hasn't
looking
been great there either. Yeah. But I'm just saying that's what I think he now projects as.
Right. Completely agree.
Like he could end up being like – he could end up being a starter still for them next year, but in name, where he's a starter in like, and you could see him, I could see him being kind of like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like if they played Chicago, I could see him playing a ton because of that style, or Cleveland. But if they're playing, say, Tampa, I could see him being, again, not this year, but next, I could see him being inactive if you have more on the roster because of the way because Tampa doesn't really have a run game, and their run game is approximated by screen passes and short dump offs. Now, of course, their offense may look totally different next year too. I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah.
So I think ideally that's where Ogundeji is. He's like your number. You would be very happy if you were the Falcons. To me, going forward, if Ogundeji is like your number 4 next year.
Yep.
If you bring Lorenzo Carter back, he's your 2 or your 3. You hope AK can fill and Malone can maybe fill some of those roles, but you get somebody who's a clear one. You get somebody who you know, whether it's in the draft or in free agency, that is going to be an impact pass rusher for you. And the other thing, too, is you have to see if you can find one. And by the way, as we're talking now, and this isn't running till Thursday, so I'm going to ask about it tomorrow, but I just realized we did not ask in anything on Monday, and this is on me, about Taquan Graham.
Yeah, because I think he's played well this year.
Well, but not only that, I mean, because he got hurt and he's on IR, and who knows if he'll be back. But like, it seemed like from a run, like him and Grady were working very well together, and I think that was helpful. But they need more. Like Timmy Horne's a fine situational player. Like he's a great depth piece. I think he'll be around for a few years as that. But you need more out of that interior. Yeah. And you need to be a little tougher on the interior. And I anticipate that that's where the Falcons are going to pay a lot of attention this offseason, is interior and edge rusher. I know I've said it a few times, but I really want to drive that point home, because all the attention, unless, like I said, Desmond Ridder plays like an all-pro the last 4 weeks of the year here, will be on the quarterback. So much of that attention, but the real thing is going to be the offensive line, the defensive line, and then some other spots they need to fill.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so noticeable at times that teams, when they want to establish themselves on offense, feel like they can run right at the heart of Atlanta's defense and just kind of say, look, stop us. Pittsburgh did it. Carolina has done it. Like, the teams that just want to run it right down Atlanta's throat, they look like Alabama or Georgia doing it sometimes. So it's a clear thing that needs to get fixed. I think actually the times when Atlanta's interior doesn't look bad, it's usually largely because of a guy like Rashaan Evans making the play, filling that hole. And so when you mentioned on the podcast that Troy Anderson, you feel could also see some increased reps over these final 4 games, but not for Rashaan Evans, but for Michael Walker, which is surprising because I'm a big Michael Walker fan. I like what he brings to the team. I don't think he's been bad this year, but I also agree with your assessment that Rashaan Evans has probably been more valuable because of, at least he's really strong, I think, against the run. Do you anticipate, if Troy Anderson comes in and starts playing well as he's played with limited opportunities this year, is that kind of the beginning of the end for Michael Walker's run here in Atlanta? And so, how do you see that shaking out?
I don't know. That's an interesting question, right? Like, if I'm the Falcons, I would bring Walker back next year.
I would too.
Because two things. One, Rashaan Evans is a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if he were to come back. I think he fits this defense well. I think he's had a good year. I'm not even talking about just the tackle numbers. Like you said, he's very good against the run. He has really become a leader, I think, of this defense.
Yeah.
He is somebody who understands Dean Pease's scheme. So as long as they're still running that, then, I could easily see Rashaan Evans being back here. He's also from the area-ish in Alabama, and this is the closest the team is to Alabama. So there's a lot of reasons for Rashaan Evans to return as long as the money's right and the Falcons want him back, and I've been given no indication that they would not at this point. Now, there's still 4 games left to go, at least. The Michael Walker question is interesting because I don't think he's played great this year. I mean, I think he's played great in – sorry, Atlanta.
That was great.
I think he's played
disagree.
Great.
They think he has played – Michael Walker himself.
I recorded my podcast for Thursday earlier, and there was jackhammering going outside my apartment. So I have no idea if that showed up. I had my producer for my podcast go, "What the heck is this?" Michael Walker is an interesting situation to me, right? Because he has a lot of splash plays, and I think that because of that, and he's a great talker, he's a really nice guy. I think because of that, a lot of people say, "Oh, he's like really, really good, playing really well." I think he's been fine. I think they believe, I believe from what I've seen in a limited scope of Troy Anderson, you need to get him reps because I think he's got a chance to be really good. I mean, the sideline to sideline speed,
it's real.
The downfield speed, you don't see linebackers like that. Remember, I forget what game it was. He chased down a punt return.
Ray McLeod, San Francisco. Yeah. God, my favorite play of the year.
But I'm saying, you want to know one of the only times I've seen that from a front 7 player ever was when Ziggy Ansah, and Ziggy Ansah, when Ziggy Ansah was healthy, was insanely good. He chased down Adrian Peterson from behind. Like, and this was when AP was still AP, not getting knocked out by Le'Veon Bell in a boxing match. Like, he was like, that's the type of athleticism we're talking about with Troy Anderson. I mean, the floor for Troy Anderson, I think the rest of his career is you are like a 4-core special teamer, Matthew Slater type. Like, that's the floor for you.
Yeah.
The ceiling is very high on Troy Anderson because of that athleticism, because of that intelligence. And I think you have to find a way to get him on the field. Now, it goes to what we saw, I think, earlier in the year. I think we could see a lot of those, what I call the 4-5-2, or not the 4-5-2. Flip that. The 2-5-4. Yeah, where, I mean, technically it's like a 4-3, but you really have 5 linebackers because your edge rushers are standing up on the field. Like, I could see that being their base, and then you have reason to have all 3 of those guys. And that gives you more speed on the field and more flexibility defensively, I think. But you need to also be able to get more out of those 2, being Grady and Taquan. But to get more out of them, you need more from the edge rushers. Like, so it's all a tricky balance as we're talking more toward 2023 than I think of this year. But it would not even shock me this year if that ends up being their base the last 4 games of the season.
It's definitely something that I want to look for because I think that in that kind of specific formation, Troy Anderson probably as like one of the inside linebackers, you've got a little bit more of a stationary role than what I think he could be in the future, which is a little bit more of that jack of all trades, kind of like big box safety hybrid linebacker guy. I just don't know if he can cover in the slot. Like, I haven't seen that element of his game enough to know if I would trust him to kind of
speed for it. Will
he does. I mean, he's got the tools. It's just the feel for it, right? And so that's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, I really hope that we do get to see a lot of him. I hope we get to see a lot of these young players. D. Alford, I know, is another guy that you mentioned. Like, that could be interesting, but
maybe I'm still not sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just still not sold that they're going to move on. They might. I mean, so here's what Arthur Smith said, because, when he was listing it, he was like, he had said corner and inside linebacker on Monday when he'd been asked about defense. And so I actually asked him, I'm like, well, are those areas you were looking at? And then he was like, well, I said this and this also, but like, it was very, very like noticeable. And maybe it's just my ears picking it up because there's a lot of information, but that tells me, they're maybe looking at something there. Now, I don't know. I still think Darren Hall is a decent to good player.
I think he's been solid, yeah.
I think he's been fine. Now, maybe you want to get a look at D. Alford, but I don't think that like Darren Hall is still young. AJ Terrell, you're not taking off the field. And Isaiah Oliver's been like, that's the key, right? If Isaiah Oliver comes off the field the last 4 games in that position, because right now they've been splitting nickel, where it's in true pass situations, it's been D. Alford. When it's a hybrid or a run situation, it's been Isaiah Oliver.
Yep.
Well, if all of a sudden, if Isaiah Oliver comes off the field and is less, is not playing as much the last 4 games, which I don't anticipate that's going to happen, but if it does, in favor of D. Alford, that probably tells you what the future is potentially there, because they're not. Sure. Isaiah Oliver's still a young enough player, especially in the nickel, that you don't want to sacrifice reps there. It's going to be really fascinating what they do there, because I think they do want to get a look at D. Alford. They may want to get a look at Rashad Fenton as well. But at the same time, I think if you believe in Darren Hall at all, you want Darren Hall to get as many reps as you can, because who knows what the future holds with Casey Hayward. He is under contract for next year. He was playing well before he got hurt. Peck is not the same. Like, that's not going to alter a lot of what you do going forward.
Not for a corner. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So you can manage that. I mean, listen, I think everybody would understand Casey probably wants to be back next year because he's from here. He does more in the community, other than Chris Lindstrom and Grady and AJ. He does more in the community than anybody.
I was at the like DB showcase thing that he and AJ put on down at down by Lakewood.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I think Casey's very invested here. And it's just a matter of, well, can he play? And listen, I don't think he has outright a job next year in terms of like a starting job. They would probably want to have a young cornerback to push him.
Yeah.
But who knows what this looks like the last 4 games? And by the way, I have no anticipation that Casey Hayward's coming back. like at all. Like, I mean, he's been around the team more, but I think that that's more as a mentorship because he also knows he would like to be back next year than anything else. Like, it's not like, okay, he's hanging around because he's magically going to start practicing tomorrow. No,
right.
I don't see that happening. I get questions every week. When's Casey Hayward coming back? I'm like, dude, he had surgery for a torn pec. A month ago, he was still in a sling. Like,
and he's old. He's a veteran. Like they don't heal as quickly as, and even still, like even if this was a young guy, if it was Kyle Pitts, like that's not, you don't rush a guy back out on the field.
But at some point too, again, if you want him back next year, why would you push it?
Exactly.
Like now, if all of a sudden they are in the playoffs and they win a couple games, I mean, Arthur Smith said that himself because you rule him out for the rest of the year, but he's like, he basically was saying, hey, if they're still hanging around, then maybe. Yeah. But I mean, you're also dealing with a guy who's been out for 2.5 months at that point. So anyway, I know we kind of got off on that tangent, but like, yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible, right? I mean, the one thing we do know is when Elijah Wilkinson comes back at left guard, he's going to be their left guard. I mean, I asked that pretty directly on Monday, and Arthur was pretty much, that's what would happen, which they ran the ball, I think, the best they ran when they had him at left guard, and I think that helps Drew Dahlman out and also helps Jake Matthews out.
Absolutely. I think that helps Drew Dahlman out. I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw, outside of the low snaps, some of Drew Dahlman's like weakest performances in the run game in particular happened once Elijah Wilkinson was out of that lineup. I think that's a huge thing that gets not talked about enough, is the play that guards have on centers. Because usually the center, like where they're going is to protect a guard or not. And so, having competent play there is important. But you mentioned kind of the final 4 games and potentially a couple of playoff wins. So if the Falcons are in the Super Bowl, maybe then we see Casey Hayward. So until then, everybody can just forget about it. But what do you get the sense? Because
I'll make you this deal. If the Falcons end up in the Super Bowl, I will do your podcast every day that week.
Oh, heck yes. We're going to do it. Yep. All right, cool. Writing it down.
And I realized I probably needed to get permission before I said that. And I've now but that's just me also saying
it's not. No. Yeah, it's not happening. But it looks like, as of right now, the path is a little bit clearer than maybe it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, because Lamar Jackson, expectations are that he'll be back for the Falcons game, but he's clearly dealing, with an injury situation. Don't know how effective he'll be. Kyler Murray confirmed today, MCL, I believe, not ACL, ACL.
I saw ACL.
ACL. Okay. So he's done for the year. Obviously, those are the 2 out of division opponents. You got the Saints on Sunday. If they win against the Saints, where does that fall priority wise in, all right, let's actually try to make something of this season after all, versus some of these extra playing time opportunities that we just spent the last 15 minutes talking about?
Well, I think I think it goes hand in hand. I mean, because here's the thing, even if they lose on Sunday to the Saints, they're not out of it. Like, and we saw that, but okay, follow me here. We saw that last year, right? Because they were in it until that Buffalo game. And then really the only game they were done was that Saints in week 18. I mean, it could be a very similar situation here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but what have you seen from the Bucs that tells you they're gonna Cincinnati should roll them, frankly? So all of a sudden, if you win if you win next week and you're the Falcons, I mean, you're very much in this, because the Panthers still have to play Tampa Bay and New Orleans, and they have to play the Lions.
Yeah,
and the Lions are, I would say, maybe the 3rd best team in the NFC at the moment.
Playing like it, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I said at the moment, they're the 3rd best team in the NFC behind Philly and Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And you can argue Minnesota one way or the other. Like, they're playing really good ball. So that could be beneficial for Atlanta. I mean, Carolina would hold the tiebreaker at the moment. So there's so much that can still happen, but obviously if the Falcons don't beat New Orleans, a lot of this, comes into play. If the Falcons lose, I think that for all intents and purposes, you're done.
Yeah.
But, technically, mathematically, you won't be. But at some point, Yeah, I mean, it's wild that we're talking about this at 5-8.
I know, right? Like technically,
usually at 5-8, be like, all right, yeah, let's, maybe you're still technically not eliminated, but like you're gonna be eliminated in a week because like that's just you got a team that's got 8 or 9 wins already, and like, no, not here, not in the NFC mess. I mean,
God,
like this is some crazy. I've covered a lot of weird stuff covering Michigan and Notre Dame and the Lions for 8 seasons. Nothing like division wide like this, man.
It's bad. It's crazy. I mean, good for the Falcons, I guess, but you could argue that it's good for any of these teams in the East Division, and long term, it's probably not great because.
Well, I mean, look, let's be honest, right? Steve Wilkes.
Yeah.
Right. Steve Wilkes could win the division, which would probably save his job, and should if they win the division. I don't care if they win it 7 wins. Like the job he's done has been quite good. Considering Carolina got rid of Christian McCaffrey, their quarterback situation is the worst in the division.
Yes.
In a division where every team has had a quarterback issue of one sort or another, Brady clearly not trusting his offensive line, and then every other team has made at least one quarterback change.
Yeah.
Like,
it's crazy. It's a crazy division, man. But we've got 4 more games left, and we can buckle up and enjoy these, and then hopefully just start fresh in 2023. Everything will be a little bit more.
Here's the crazy thing, Will. If they make the playoffs, they'll host a game.
I know.
And they'll probably host what? I mean, you would think
it would be Dallas. Yeah.
You would think, but I mean, Dallas hasn't exactly been good in the playoffs.
Dan Quinn and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I like those odds in our favor.
Right. And then, I mean, if it's somehow not Dallas, it's probably Washington at that point?
Mm-hmm.
More than likely. Well,
a team that
you played even.
Yeah.
Like, and honestly, if Deron Payne doesn't bat a ball in the air, you probably win that game.
Yep.
And then it's a completely different conversation right now because then you're tied with the Bucs and you have a really good shot at getting to the playoffs. But I'm of the belief that if they, I mean, of course, this is all butterfly effect, right? Like that pass ends up being a touchdown. They probably end up winning that game. And then Mariota has confidence and probably has a little bit more room to play with. And maybe they go out and beat Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
and then
it's all
conversation.
It's all dominoes.
It's wild how that goes. Or they get blown out by Pittsburgh and you're still in the same situation. Who knows?
Yeah, it's all dominoes. It's all how one thing affects the other, which is something that I give this team credit for being resilient. Sometimes in the face where Falcons teams of the past would have just fallen like one of those many dominoes and folded and said things aren't going our way. This team does seem to try to make stuff happen, which is why I'm curious to see what they can make happen over the final 4 games.
Well, that's the thing, right? And I think this is probably want to end on this, right? Like,
cool.
Arthur Smith, from the Twitter portion of this fan base, stop trying to fire Arthur Smith. Please. I'm tired of answering these questions.
He's good. If he was the offensive coordinator, everybody would be saying, well, at least we've got a great offensive coordinator.
Right. He's not getting fired. He's done a very good coaching job with this team.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, this team had the most dead money in the NFL entering the season and had a top 5 cap space too.
Yep.
That means your roster is not nearly, and granted, I mean, you're paying guys what you're paying guys, and not every contract, as we know, is a good contract for a high-priced guy.
Right.
But generally, that will tell you, hey, like the more money you have allocated to players versus dead money, the better your chance your roster is. Well, they have it's a rough roster, man. The fact that they're in this is, like it's like fans recalibrated expectations because they weren't awful, because they weren't the Texans. And it's like, hey, remember where you were. Remember what the expectations are. Like, Arthur Smith has done a very good job. He's a very creative play caller. I think he's still growing into it a little bit as a coach, but that's okay. Like, he is a good coach. I've covered a lot of bad coaching. I've covered a lot of bad coaches. Not every coach has their flaws. But I'm telling you, Arthur Smith's a good football coach. Like, stop. Please stop. You know what I'm excited about, Will? I'm not going to get any more when is Desmond Ridder starting questions.
Oh, it's a beautiful day.
But I will say this. I feel like the over-under is at 2. If Desmond Ridder doesn't play well, if I get when is Marcus Mariota starting again, or when is Logan Woodside starting questions on my podcast on Sunday. I feel like that's going to happen, and someone's going to listen to this podcast and just do that to troll me. And if you do, thank you, sir or ma'am.
All right. Well, please send all of your trolling emails to Michael Rothstein, who has been today's guest. Check out his stuff on ESPN. Catch his tweets and send your lovely tweets his way at Mike Rothstein. Please listen to From the Perch. Mike, did I miss anything? You got anything else before I let you go?
Oh, sure. Let's just add all this. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, and Post at Mike Rothstein. And Mastodon and Post, I have like no followers. So come follow if you're on those platforms. If you're on Facebook, I'm on Michael Rothstein Journalist. If you're on TikTok, I'm on Mike Rothstein Sports. And I think that's all of it. I think I might still have an account on whatever that Clubhouse thing was too, but I don't use it. I think I actually deleted it from my phone. But, it's kind of like you squat your name a little bit just in case, I guess. But it was like a cool tool for like a week. So I'm on way too much social media, but not Snapchat, Will. Not Snapchat. Never Snapchat.
Never Snapchat. I'm out on Snapchat too. They lost me with all the real like kind of things early on. I'm kind of old when it comes to social media. Twitter is where you can find me.
Well, I'm also not on Be Real, but that's okay because Be Real, I don't like the concept of Be Real because like too often I feel like that's going to happen while I'm at like the gym. And no one needs to see me working out.
Right. Yeah. It's for an introvert like me. I'm like, you don't need to see the inside of my house for the 14th day in a row. Nobody's going to follow me for that.
You don't need to see my bland white walls that you see behind me. And I've got the World Cup semifinal on there. I assume Argentina's still winning. You just don't need to see that. No one needs to see that. No one needs to see me. Look at this face. No one needs to see that.
All right. Well, on that note, then we will let you go so nobody has to see you any further. But Mike, I really appreciate the time. This was awesome catching up and getting all of your insights.